about this week. So this week, we're basically trying to catch us back up to the schedule where when Randy was sick for a week, I kind of pushed things a couple of weeks. But this week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of lump together the intro and talk about compositing, basic compositing in After Effects tonight. We have the materials that you're downloading from the server. We will use at the end of after the lecture for you guys to play with. I've got some goals for you to accomplish at the end of this presentation so you can see what I'm asking you to try and do. Hopefully, in the process, we will get you all to that point where achieving those things is not out of reach. It's not that I think the biggest problem that we run into with After Effects is that it is considerably different creature than anything you've worked with yet. How many of you guys have worked with Photoshop? Yeah, everybody, because you did A and B, right? So how many of you worked with Illustrator? How many of you have worked, obviously, with Premiere? Should be everybody. So After Effects shares attributes of all of these programs and in different measure. And so you guys will kind of draw from those experiences to create, to help kind of get you spun up on this. Those three programs all kind of funnel into this in terms of those skills are definitely useful to you and can be applied and should be applied when using After Effects. So we'll first start this week talking about questions from last week, which is our color work, stuff like that. We'll go over the After Effects interface and the basic workflow very, very briefly. We will talk about, once again, about dynamic linking. Then we'll get to talking about importing and compositing using Photoshop assets, meaning that you can take a Photoshop PSD file and import it into After Effects, and there are special ways that you can manage that. We'll talk about shape layers and groups. So this is where we talk about kind of basic compositing, pre-composing and when you might need it. And then we'll talk more about blend modes, which we did 2 weeks ago, masks, and a new thing called track mats. So some of this has to do, again, this is basic compositing. So this is like the beer and pretzels of visual effects work is blending modes, masks, track mats, and the function of how layering works. All right, so some questions. Oh.
I was just going to ask,
yeah.
So all those things that we're doing, are you combining 2 weeks of stuff?
I'm summarizing 1 week very, very briefly, which is really just the introduction. I would go into more detail about kind of like, blah, 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 blah. I'd do the full tour. It's going to be whirlwind. But this is the week that I planned on compressing into one anyway, because it is, you would feel we'd get about 8:30 and there'd be nothing for you to do. So I'm like, yeah, I can squish these together and make a full class out of it. And besides, it sets us up to be able to do interesting things before spring break. Okay, but don't freak out. It's not, your homework is not doubled, if that is any help at all. I'm just going to have you do the compositing work because, again, the basic. Yeah, we'll get to it. Don't. There shouldn't be a major cause of concern that I'm trying to catch us up this week, because we're changing subjects anyway. We're moving on to After Effects. So if there's something that we miss, we can catch it. We can reteach, or I can get you caught up in following weeks, and it's no big deal. Well before the midterm. All right. First question. What color correction tool works best? There was a couple of these. What color correction tool works best for fixing overexposed film clips or video clips? I am sorry to say that once you're, if there's anything that color correction can't fix, it is overexposed video. Because, and here's why, is that when you overexpose a video clip, meaning that the camera is set too open, or the length, either aperture is too open, shutter speed is too slow, or the ISO is set too sensitive, you excite that sensor so much that it basically just says, it's brighter than I can possibly comprehend. I'll just give it white. And once that pixel is white, like absolute white, there's no amount of detail or fakery you can do to not make it some shade of gray. If you were to try and ease off from absolute white, you get gray. You don't get yellowish gray. You don't get greenish gray. You don't get bluish gray. You get gray, and that's it. So, yeah, the short answer is there's really no good color correction tool for overexposed media. Underexposed media is somewhat of a different matter, because sometimes when you underexpose and your shadows have maybe they've got a lot of noise in the shadows, that's actually something that there are effects available, maybe not built into After Effects or into Premiere, but there are effects available that can clean a lot of that up and make it more usable. So it's, if anything, it's better to underexpose slightly so that you make sure that you don't clip your highlights than it would be to overexpose because you want to make sure you get shadow detail. Because if you are booking on shadow detail, there's probably going to be some part of it that is some part of your frame that's going to be overexposed, and hence white. The end. There's no super white when it comes to CMOS video sensors. What is the difference between tint, temperature, and hue? Ooh, that's actually a great question. So tint, in the parlance of, I think we're talking about, let me just throw together a real quick project here so that we can get to color. Oops. Yeah. So when we get to color, and there's no clip selected, so I can't do anything. Let me bring up something quickly. I'll just pull something in from this week so that I can. All right. So let's not get too freaked out about what this looks like, but just that we'll get to what this is in a second. So when you talk about basic correction and you have temperature and tint, you notice that temperature goes from blue to orange, and that has to do with white balance color temperature, which is, you know, in the pure sense, when you talk about daylight, you talk about tungsten, you talk about 5600, 5200 Kelvin and 2900 or 3200 Kelvin. Those are the opposite poles that we're talking about. So on the orange end of temperature is the lower color temperatures, the tungstens, the 2900 Kelvin, and the upper end, the blue end, is the 5600, 6000, 7,000, so on. So, so that is temperature. Tint has to do kind of, it was born from fluorescent lighting. So fluorescents give you kind of a greenish hue, or a greenish tint rather, and you correct it by adding magenta. So part of that is that you can shift between green and magenta on this. They are all, you know, relatively related on a color wheel, but again, I'm trying to simplify it here from the point of view of what you're looking at in the Lumetri color tool. And then when you get down to hue, hue is this color wheel. And so actually any of these color wheels will be that. So these are the color wheels where you talk about, you know, color moving is a continuum, but it moves from red to magenta to blue to cyan to green to yellow and back. And orange is in there as well. But you'll notice that on the poles, you have blue, and you have orange, which is here, and you have green, and you have magenta, which is there. Okay, so where was the other tool that we looked? Oh, that's right. So when you look at lumetri scopes, just so that we nail this one well and thoroughly shut, is it vectorscope YUV? Yes, vectorscope YUV. So you probably can't see it very well on the projector, but you might be able to see it better on the screens over there. But if you look over here where you have this scope, you see that there's these very faint lines, okay? And they cross each other at a right angle. And these are temperature. So this is orange, and this is blue, and this is hue, or sorry, tint, going from green to magenta. Okay, so that is the relationship between those, between tint and temperature, is that they exist orthogonally on the color wheel, if that helps you at all. If it doesn't help you at all, just realize that they're 90 degrees kind of away from each other on this circle, this color wheel, which is hue, which is all of the available color values. So that is the short answer to this. What is the difference between temperature and hue? Would you apply a look to unify the look of a whole film before or after doing basic contrast and color balance work? This is almost universally what you would do after. Looks are something that you apply once you've done basic exposure correction and basic any color correction that is like color cast related, meaning wrong color temperature, or maybe there's an unwanted you're in a mixed lighting environment where you've got some daylight and some tungsten, or some fluorescent and some tungsten, or something like that, where you have a mixed environment. You would want to basically do some of that basic color work to get something that looks consistent throughout, and then you can apply a look. The look is really meant to be a creative, and that's why it's under the creative group on Lumetri as opposed to basic correction. Basic correction is meant to go first, then creative, and then so on. And if you skip the creative group and you go further on down, that's kind of the, you don't have to use all of the groups in the Lumetri color effect to make it look nice. Okay. Between the tools we've seen in class, which is the best tool to use if you want consistent color through all the clips in your project? Okay, so this one's not as easy to answer, because a lot of, the answer that Adobe has is you always should use the Lumetri color control, because they've basically deprecated almost everything else. All of the other high-powered color tools have been kind of put in this, don't use this anymore. You've got this now awesome Lumetri color effect that you can use. So that's Adobe's answer to this. I know that there was some banter about the auto color corrector, or auto color, which is, it will pick a white point, a black point, and a white balance for you automatically based on what it perceives is the brightest, the darkest, and the middle gray values in a particular clip. That does not necessarily mean that it is going to provide you the best possible outcome for those for that media, when you can go in and do this by the numbers. So your mileage, the short answer is your mileage may vary. You should use the tools that you feel the most comfortable using. But definitely beware the one-click solution to click this button to make it look awesome is inherently lying to you. It is click this button to make it look passably mediocre is probably a better way to describe those effects. All right.
Unless you're colorblind.
Unless you're colorblind, in which case you should rely on the scopes. The scopes will never lie to you about what you see. So if you can learn to read the scopes, even if you have no green or red receptors in your eyes and you can't see color very well, you can credibly create a good color contrast, knowing what you're supposed to be looking for based on the scopes, and especially the RGB parade, and even the you can use the histogram, you can use the vector scope to be able to move the color where you believe it needs to be, even though you might not personally have the ability to perceive all the colors. That is not the only way to do this. Okay, so that is why I show you the scopes, so that you guys can make that, and do beware that the way you perceive color on a Macintosh monitor versus one of these Dell monitors in the labs versus your computer that you have at home versus this laptop here versus those TVs versus this projector are all guaranteed to be different. Guaranteed to be different. So they might be close, they might be similar, but they will be different. They will have different contrast ratios, they'll have different gamma curves, they'll have different color temperatures, all of that. And if you work by the scopes and you work by the numbers, it will and it looks good on one screen with that situation, then it's more likely to play well on other screens. But of course, we had the advice last week of don't forget to play it on as many screens as you possibly can play it on to verify. So trust but verify, right? That's always a good one. Does it matter to the final export which pane of the lumetri color control you use? This is phrased in a weird manner, Evan. What did you mean by this? Is there a one on the left and one on the right? Oh, you mean when you apply some color correction here? Say, for instance, we did that and it adds the metric color. I gotta turn these lights off. Hang on. Really? They are exactly related to each other. They are linked at the hip. So anything you do here shows up there. So if I change this to that, you see it updates immediately with whatever. So all these values are tied to these sliders and vice versa. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So glad that, yeah, these are, this is basically just another view of this pane over here. So in case you're in editing or you're in effects, you can still, you might not have you do have the lumetri color here, but if you didn't have it front and center here, you could still work in this, and you still have all the tools available to you from, the color wheels or curves or, and so on. So you can just twirl these down and they're all available to you. There shouldn't be, but if it's the case, then it's just you got a slow computer, and I'm really sorry. So, okay. This is, yeah, so this was answered already, but I'll quickly say, what's the point of going through all the trouble using color correction lumetri when we can just use the other color? Because autocolor is not awesome. It may, it's like pulling the one-armed bandit in Vegas. Sometimes you get a jackpot and you're like, damn, this thing's awesome. I use it every time. And then suddenly you're like, why doesn't it work as well as it did that one time before? And that's because autocolor is really only capable of reading the pixels in your footage and seeing what color values there are there, and then kind of going, yeah, this is probably the best contrast curve to apply to that. So it might get you in the neighborhood, but the trouble is that with the auto, if I'm not mistaken, once you've applied that to this, is there actually one called autocolor? Yeah, autocolor. Oh, look, it's under obsolete, but all right, I'll put it in there. So we'll drop it in here, and so did it do? Yeah, so it increased some. I mean, and it's very vague on this. You can barely tell that it increased. It removed a little bit of color contrast, turned these chains on this image to a neutral gray. So it said, "Oh, that's a color cast." And it kind of, yeah, it removes some general color from the image. So, and yes, it has some, you know, some ability to you know, you got a couple of knobs you can turn, but it's not particularly sophisticated and may not really do much for you. Now, in this case, I had, it decided that this was gray. Now, if you didn't want that to be gray, tough cookies, autocolor says it's gray, and so gray you get. So, you know, your mileage, again, you know, it's the press this button for immediately passively mediocre work, whereas you could work this in Lumetri and get exactly what you want out of it. So, you know, that's the short answer to that.
Question?
Yes.
I think that especially when you're doing skin tones, it's the difference between making somebody look like they're dead and whether or not they're vibrant in terms of being able to give them some color. Got it.
Okay. I think that with the advent of the hue saturation control in Lumetri and also the ability to selectively, you can selectively catch skin tones, a variety of skin tones, and then use that HSL secondary to do that. You can basically select just the range of skin tones that you want, and then you can apply either a saturation, you can bump saturation, you can shift it, you know, either warm it or cool it, depending on what you're looking for. If you want the best color for any skin tone is still going to be something that looks like natural skin, as opposed to this is what a zombie looks like. I mean, obviously, you know, if you're shooting at night or if it's a nighttime scene or something along those lines, or there's a strong blue light or there's a strong red light, getting a good skin tone is going to be a challenge no matter what in those cases. You're just lucky to get it well exposed. But if it's a scene like daylight scene and you're just doing I want to put a look where I warm the highlights and cool the shadows, but I don't want to cool the skin tones. I want the skin tones to stay, you know, natural. That would be something where you do have the Lumetri color tool is probably still better suited for that. But there is no, I mean, there are tools out there. There's plugins you can buy that do a much better job of selecting skin tones and then being able to just isolate them and then say, okay, bump saturation on skin tones or warm them up or cool them off or whatever to accommodate what you're talking about. So the built-in tool of Lumetri Color doesn't have a one button select skin tones so that you can work on them.
Especially but if you have a color other than your skin.
Right. Yes. Well, yeah. Yours, for instance, or any either Asian or South Asian, or I mean, yeah. There's a wide variety, but they all tend to loop themselves under that vaguely orange end of the color temperature scale. So, but yeah, I hear you. I think this might be one of the last questions. Is maybe this is maybe second to last. Why don't we use speed grade? That is a very interesting question. The answer to which is because we don't need to and we don't have time. If you believe that your project needs something like speed grade, their workflow, that's learning a third workflow, actually a fourth workflow if you account the fact that we've talked about audition in this class. So how many apps do you want to learn in one semester? I'm trying to keep it sane. And then there, you know, so we're not going to touch on every Adobe Creative Cloud application for as part of this. SpeedGrade is also out of favor, as I understand it. I haven't looked recently at it, but it was, you know, it got a little bit of attention back in, I think, 2015. I haven't really seen much about it recently. I think the Lumetri color effect has taken a lot of the air out of the balloon that SpeedGrade was floating. So don't know. It's not like I'm trying to choose a winner here, but it's not a. I think between the fact that you guys have enough on your plate just learning Premiere, some Audition, and After Effects, that throwing SpeedGrade in, because it's a wildly different workflow than any of these other ones. I didn't. We did discuss it though, so it's not. Yeah. All right. And then this one was kind of out of left field. What's the difference between vector and raster? That actually has more to do with what we're going to be talking about next week. So I'm going to defer that question. I think that the idea behind vector and raster is something that comes out. Vector would be like Illustrator, which is, it's a mathematical drawing that is captured in a file that then gets drawn mathematically on screen. Raster is like, here's a set of pixels, draw them on screen. So that's the difference. That's the key difference between the two. But again, we will touch on some of these. We're probably not going to talk about it tonight, but maybe we could. Okay. And we're running behind, so now I got to catch up. So let's talk a little bit about After Effects. If you guys haven't already, you can start After Effects on your desktop. It looks like this. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in the presentation, but suffice it to say that it has a lot in common with what you expect to see with it looks on its surface very similar to Premiere. So here's an example project. In fact, this is the original project that I kind of culled to get to put on the disk for you to download and use tonight. So and I'm always trying to pitch them to the film festival. So, hey, come to the film festival. So the idea is that you have several areas, zones on the screen, and I want to kind of quickly touch on them kind of in roughly clockwise fashion. Is you start over here with the project pane. Okay, so this is where you're going to have your project information. It should look very similar in style and function to what you're used to seeing in Premiere and other apps. Most importantly, though, these little dividers, these groupings, are not called bins in After Effects. They're called folders. And so it goes. All right, so along the top, you have your tools. And that tools actually kind of move over to here as well. So you have pointer hand, magnifying, rotate, camera, pan behind. You have shape tools, pen tools, text tools, and then you have a variety of painting and other stuff. So these are very reminiscent of what you might see in Photoshop. You have the main composition area, which is where you're going to be looking. So it says composition on it. This is kind of generally the viewer is what they like to describe this as, because sometimes it'll be the composition you're working on. Sometimes it'll be a particular element or asset that you're looking at. And we can experiment with that one. You have the info pane over here. Sometimes you might find that you need to know the position of something on screen in terms of the frame that you're seeing, and that, or even the color information that's available to you in the info pane. You've got preview over here, this little group right here, and this is where you'll be able to play your comp out and pre-render it so that you can watch it. Effects and presets. This pane kind of is very much something that you're going to learn a lot. You'll also get very accustomed to typing in the names of effects that you're looking for in the search bar, as opposed to browsing, long form on, through the list here. And then finally, you have this timeline, which is very reminiscent of the sequence timeline that you have in Premiere. It's not the same, it's just similar. So, and we'll talk about what those differences are once we get to the live demo. But suffice it to say, you've got you know, a variety of things stacked. One, or you know, you have ones that are up above, you have ones that are down underneath, and they combine together to create what you're seeing in the viewer, which is this comp right here. Okay. All right. So your basic workflow with After Effects, in very broad strokes, is you're going to create the project. So you're going to create the project either explicitly, meaning that you go to File, New, or you hit Command or Control N, and you create the project. You'll either explicitly do it or you're going to implicitly do it, which is generally where you go through Premiere and you say, send this to After Effects, and it will create a project for you there. So it sometimes those projects will be created for you, but most of the time, if you're like me, you want to create them explicitly and then link them in yourself. You're going to import assets and elements into your project. These assets might be video, they might be still images, vector, meaning like Adobe Illustrator files, or other vector formats. You know, there's scalable vector graphics, SVGs for the web world can also be imported into this, and so on. You're going to organize them into folders, not bins, as you would have them in Premiere. You're going to create compositions. There's a reason why it's underlined here. And the way that the drill goes is something like this. What is the question is, and the question will be on the exam, what is the primary work product of After Effects? The answer is whatever you, and actually the answer to any of those questions for Premiere or Audition or other things is when you press Command or Control N in the application, what are you creating? So in Premiere, and somebody shout out, in Premiere, what is the primary work product of Premiere Pro? Nope. Sequence. Because when you press Command or Control N in Premiere, you're creating a sequence. In After Effects, when you hit Command or Control N, you are creating a composition. And so that is the primary work product. What you put the primary work product into is a project, okay? Because you might have more than one. You might have more than one sequence. You might have more than one comp inside of a project. So the project is kind of the container into which all of your references to your media and everything else gets stuffed. And then the comp or the project, the comp or the sequence. Now in Audition, I don't remember if Command N creates a new audio file or if it creates a new session. I don't remember. It might depend on which mode you're in. So at any rate, back to this. Next thing in this is you're going to place assets, the elements, text, and other layers into that composition. You'll apply effects to those layers. Sometimes you're going to pre-compose these layers, and we'll talk about what pre-composition is to accomplish certain things. And then you're going to repeat this as necessary until finished. Famously, the way that you work on most media projects is you keep pounding away at it until you run out of time or money or both. And then you're done. You ship it. You know, it's like finished. So, yeah. So you repeat as often as needed to complete what you need to do. And that is about as easy as I can make the workflow describe to you. Yes, it's remarkably generic, but it has some very important things to understand. Pre-composition, the fact that compositions are your primary work product, and that you have this notion of layers. Okay, so we're going to talk about all of those. Okay, so this is where I will proselytize a little bit more about the evils of dynamic linking, but I will concede a few pros so that you feel like I'm not just being nasty. When you know, After Effects and Premiere are very are very well connected inside of this, between what After Effects does and what Premiere does. So you can create, like I said, inside of Premiere, you can send media clips to After Effects and create a composition. And what that will do is it will automatically create the project file. It will import that project file that it created into your Premiere project and replace the clip in your sequence with a link to the composition that it's just created for you. So it does a lot of nice little behind the scenes sleight of hand to automatically set you up to replace one media clip with a comp inside of After Effects. That is all things that you can do by hand as well. You do not have to use Send After Effects to be able to take advantage of that. Just that that is what that little menu does for you. So it's super handy and it's convenient. Any changes to your After Effects project will immediately show up in Premiere. So if you go and you open your Premiere, you open this After Effects project and you make a tweak or you add an effect or you do other things, as soon as you go back to Premiere, you're going to see that change show up. And then finally, there's a templating capability. Now this has changed just last year, but it's still there. Is using Essential Graphics now inside of After Effects instead of, they had a bodged together templating capability before. This is a lot more streamlined, but templating capability allows semi-automatic lower thirds, meaning that you can customize the text in an After Effects composition without opening After Effects. So if you have text showing up on screen and it's a boilerplate lower third, and you're going to use it for every guest that comes on your TV show or whatever, or every person that you interview in your documentary or whatever, you can use that template again and again and again, the After Effects template. And then just each time you drop it into your sequence, you can say, oh, for this one, I want the text to read this, and it will just change it for you. Super convenient. Won't lie to you. So I concede that those are all pros. They do come with some very sobering drawbacks. First of all of this only works when the version of After Effects and Premiere are the exact same version. Okay? Means now that's partly because Adobe wants you to stay up to date. But sometimes you will find, and I've done this before where I've worked in Premiere on one version. I've had an older version of After Effects or a newer version of After Effects because of one bug or another or some other workaround that I was working through. And that linkage is totally broken. You can't send anything from Premiere to After Effects if they're not exactly the same version. If the linkage is broken for any reason whatsoever, you move the file, you forget where the file is, you move everything but that project file, it can be a problem getting it back together, which basically means you have to recreate that link by hand, which you should know how to do. That's not something that you should kind of assume is subject to just be automated. And finally, the biggest con that I think is part of this is that by doing this, in exchange for the super convenient changes to your After Effects projects immediately show up, it slows Premiere down because the composition is not rendered in your sequence. So it's not rendered out beforehand. You just you're looking at something that needs to be rendered. If there's any change and you haven't rendered your sequence for that change, then it's going to show up as red in your sequence, and you're going to have to render it, or it's going to drop frames when you play it back until you do. So be informed. Slightly related to this is, and this will catch you out as well if you use Premiere a lot and then you switch to After Effects like an Alt-Tab sort of thing, be aware of these gotchas. These keyboard differences are pretty serious. In Premiere, the arrow keys move the playhead in a timeline, okay? Means that when you're in a timeline and you arrow left or arrow right or up and down, arrow left and right will move one frame. Arrow up and down will do what? we'll move to the next edit for whatever track is enabled for, whatever track is targeted. In After Effects, when you move up and down, left, right, what do you move? No, well, no. What? Not just this, but if you move arrow keys in After Effects, what do you think happens? You're moving whatever object selected on a layer, and that will piss you off. Oh my God! I'm so glad there was no recording going when I first landed on. I moved what? So yeah, it's crazy. So yeah, in After Effects, you definitely want to make sure that you use page up, page down to do frame forward, frame back in the timeline. In Premiere, Enter generally opens and executes something. So if you're in the middle of something, you hit Enter, it will open it or it will execute it. It will kind of enable it. It will activate in some way. In After Effects, if you hit Enter, the text of your layer will light up and you can change the name of it. That will also vex you. Minus and equals or minus and plus will zoom in and out of sequences and other windows, whereas in After Effects, comma and period zooms you in and out. Enjoy. Last, Premiere keyboard can be remapped, meaning that there are different presets and alterations you can do to Premiere. After Effects, I don't know. I haven't checked 2018. But generally speaking, what I found with After Effects is the keyboard mapping is pretty much what it is. And so you're expected to learn it and not vice versa. You can't just wrestle it into whatever shape you want. So if you've used some other compositing software, maybe you feel like, you have to, you want to be able to leverage that keyboard muscle memory. After Effects is not the program for that. You do it the way After Effects wants you to. All right, so this pink bar means that we're going to switch to this. It is 7:50. How are we doing? Can I do the initial ramp up and then we'll take a break? Okay, so initial ramp up. So when you look at this, when you start this up, when you open it, if you don't create a project, it will just create one for you called Untitled. But for this time, I'm going to open a project on the desktop under week 7. And I'm not going to use the template tonight. I thought I was, and then I decided not to. So open up the SDFF trailer green band. And when you do, you should see something like this. Okay. So let's go through what we're seeing here. Again, you should recognize there's a project pane, the toolbar, the info window, the effects and presets, and the timeline, and the viewer up here that gives you everything that you're looking for. What are we seeing in this project? So you'll see that there are some, there's a couple of folders in here. There's also a Adobe Illustrator file. If you were to double click on that, you'd see that you get this festival logo, which is actually the Sebastopol Documentary Film Festival logo. It's the one that they used to use. They've actually just changed it last year. It's very similar to this, but it's more horizontal. But the idea behind that is that you have a couple of compositions in here as well. So putting all this aside, if we go ahead and so actually when I double click this, you notice that it created a different tab under the viewer called footage. So you have a tab that's the composition, you have a tab that's footage, and they are not, and they have different abilities down here. You'll see that the controls in the viewer change depending on what you're looking at. So they're actually, this one adds some, whereas this one is kind of a stripped down subset. If for any reason you need to, you can come down here to the zoom window and click fit, or you can choose a zoom level that suits you depending on the work you're doing. You have, again, you have folders, you have comps. So again, when we want to work on something, we would go up to the file menu, go to new, and click. Oh, where is that? There we go. Oh, so it's not under the file menu. It's actually under the composition menu. There's a new composition, and the shortcut is Command or Control N. If you click that, you'll see that it brings up a composition settings window. This is, you'll get used to going pretty quickly through this. However, for this first time, I want to just kind of show you that you have a composition name that you want to give it. Generally speaking, you should give it something that describes what you're working on. So first comp, not fire comp, first comp. You have a preset that you can choose. Please don't choose any of these. You have HDTV. Any of these three are probably, actually 24 and 2997 are probably going to be the two most common ones that you run up against. If you're into 4K or, if you're into that, you can do this 2160p or whatever they call it now. You also have those available too. Now they have an 8K option. Woo! All right. For now, we're just going to stick with HDTV 1080 2997, which basically sets your width and height of the comp, the pixel aspect ratio, and the frame rate. You also have a duration here that is something that you can set by default. By default, it's usually 30 seconds. I had at one point gone into the preferences and changed it to 10 seconds, but for this purpose. And you can also change a background color. If you know that this is going to play on top of something that it's going to have transparency, and you can choose what color background it's going to have. Is there a problem?
Yeah, ours opened a little weirdly.
How did it open weirdly?
I had a tech kit error when it opened and not showing.
You don't have American Typewriter as those fonts?
No.
How fun. Yeah. I thought for sure there would be American Typewriter on all of these computers, considering that some of them do have it, yeah, and some of them don't. Super cool. All right. I should have chosen Arial. I just know I should have chosen Arial.
I like how it shows nothing.
Yeah, nothing's not awesome. So let me get through this, and then I'll take a look at it and see if I can make a change to the comp, and then you can re-download it. It's a quick thing. But for the duration, you can choose to make the duration shorter, longer. By default, it's 30 seconds. And once you do, then you're treated to an empty expanse of a viewer canvas. By default, it has these little guides on here. Anybody know what these are?
Title safe.
Yep. And what's the other one?
Action safe.
Yeah, action safe. Very good. So, and it's for both aspects. So you have it for a widescreen aspect. This is action safe. This is title safe. And this is for a 4:3 ratio. This is action safe, and this is title safe. So if you ever see broadcasters where they put the little watermark, they've stopped doing this as much as they used to from 10 years ago. But they used to put their watermark or their station logo right here, is because it's visible on both standard def and widescreen monitors. Okay, so if you don't want to look at these, the trick is that you have graph and guide options that are available to you, so you can turn that off by just clicking it off, and now it's gone, and now it's back. So you do, by default, it is there, I guess. Any change that you make to these preferences are sticky from one time you close down to the next time you reopen. So if you turn off title safe and then you close down After Effects, you restart it, it's not going to re-enable it. On these computers, it does, because these are all deep freeze, basically wipes them clean every time you boot them. Whereas this preference would be saved from session to session. All right. For ease of this, what are we looking at here? We've got the need for some kind of content in this composition, and that is where you go to layers. Okay, so under layers, you have the ability. You can create new layers, and there's several different types. We're not going to talk about all of them tonight, We'll talk about probably 2 tonight. We will talk about maybe shapes as well. So we might talk about 3 of them tonight, but we will talk about several of these in a couple weeks. We might touch on this as well. So most of these, you will use many of these in the course of this class. So, and so you don't have to understand what null objects are or adjustment layers or what Max on Cinema 4D. We're not using Cinema 4D in the class. Sorry. So if you wanted to just quickly put something up, you could create a solid. As soon as you do that, it comes up with settings. Again, you can give it a size. It defaults to the size of your comp. You can also, if it's not the same size as your comp, you can click this button to make it that. So if for some reason it was sized in some weird way, you can just click this and it's going to reset those numbers to the size of your composition. You can choose the color. Maybe you want it to be bright red. And then you click OK, and now you have eye-searingly red on your comp. Okay. Once you have that layer, suddenly there's a whole host of options available to you here. And I think what we'll do is we're going to take a quick break. It's 7:58, so I want to give you guys a chance to stand up, walk around. Let me see if I can address the technical issues. And then we'll come back and start to talk about what these layers, there's all these buttons and things on this, and I want to make sure that you guys got that straight. So 8:10, we'll get right back to business. Get back to it. So Lorena, you realize your USB stick is over here?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Also, 22 has a problem as well.
22 has that same problem. So yeah, all I can offer to you right now is if you're having that problem, it's not on every Windows computer, I don't believe. Is it true? Are all the Windows computers not working?
No.
So some of them work and some of them don't. So if yours doesn't work, do your best to try and find one that does. I'm sorry. These are problems with the installation that I can't fix. And so I'll put a ticket in with Karen, the lab manager, and have her take a look at it. We are the only class in here that uses After Effects. So the fact that we just discovered it and it's, we're a quarter of the way into or almost halfway through the semester is not a surprise. So yeah, I apologize for that one. That was not the good news that I was hoping for, to have like some of them just behave bizarrely where you can't see anything. Okay. So now I don't want to go on a brute force tour because, again, I want to be able to talk about compositing and other stuff. We have about an hour left of time together before I want you guys to be able to do stuff. I'd really like to be able to do stuff in the next half hour so that you guys have enough time to play and exercise and ask questions and then decide that you've had enough of me and leave. So let's quickly talk about some highlights here. So when you look at, I'm going to have to turn off the light again. Okay. This is where I really wish I had a zoom function in on screen here, but I don't. Because I could zoom in on this Mac monitor, but it wouldn't show on the projector. So when you're looking at a layer, you're seeing you see a variety of controls over here. First and foremost, you have a little eyelid or a little eyeball. That's just a visibility switch, just like in Photoshop and to a certain degree in Premiere. So you can turn the layers on and off individually. If you turn them on and off inside the composition, doesn't necessarily mean that you're turning them off when you render it. Be aware of that, okay? It is something that you can force compositions to turn all of their layers on for rendering, regardless of what it looks like here. So be aware that that is a possibility, but we'll get to that in a second. You have if there was audio on this layer, you would see a speaker icon here, and you could click it to mute. So if this was a video clip that included audio. This dot is actually what solos it. So if we had another layer on here, say we'll create a new text layer and we'll be like, what's up? Because that's one of the favorite things I like to write when I'm doing things that aren't related to productivity. So when you solo a layer, you come over here and you press this. You'll see that it removes everything that isn't also lit up with that dot. So you can just solo one, you could solo the other, or you could solo several. Another thing that you can do is you can kind of roll on and off these. You can click and drag, and it will light up or turn off these icons as when you're dealing with multiple layers. And you have a padlock which locks the layer so that if you try to modify the layer in any way, it actually won't let you. That was not intentional. So let's go back to this. Will open up the solid. It basically just treats this like it's unavailable. And in fact, when you click on it inside the timeline, it kind of blinks at you saying, hey, I'm locked, don't bother me. So if you find that you're not able to modify anything, or if you click it and it does that, that's the place to look. You have a couple of things here which are called, this is the shy indicator. You can actually make some layers shy, which is what, and what that means is you can hide them if you click on this. If you click on this button here that has a little, Kilroy was here, Snoopy nose guy. But if you click that, it will hide any layer that has this set. So if you set that, you can turn all the layers off, but you still have the layers showing in the composition. It's just it's a way to kind of help. You can clean this up if you're working on some sets of layers, but not all of them. This is where we have the two different purposes for this button. One is has to do with shape layers, and one has to do with comp layers. For comp, and we'll get to this when we talk about pre-composing, but you have the ability to click this to set some special flags for either of those special types of layers, whether that's a pre-composed layer or if it is a vector layer. And we'll talk about why that is in a moment. In fact, I can show you that now. So why not? We'll show you that now. We'll drag this fine logo into, and we'll hide the text. So now you've got this vector Adobe Illustrator file. Notice that it shows up fine here, and you're like, oh, that's really cool. And just by way of, I'm just going to quickly show you that if I scale this up, you'll notice that it's pixelated, and you're thinking, wait, this is an After Effects, or this is an Illustrator file. Why is it pixelated? That's because every time you import an Illustrator, man, I'll get that straight some point, an Illustrator file or some other vector format into After Effects, it rasterizes it upon import. Okay, so it's rasterized when you import it. Everything in After Effects is kind of pixels. So now you're thinking, great, now what? I've got a vector graphic that I can't zoom in or can't scale it. Well, that's where this little button comes in handy. And in fact, it's enabled on this one, whereas on these others it's grayed out or already kind of preset and grayed out. Is that this will allow you to continuously raster this layer. So if it's a vector layer and you click this, sorry, not on the solid, but on the logo. Yeah, if you click the raster, continuously raster button, now you see that the vector graphic is nice and crisp and what you expected to see. Okay? So that is that one. You also have next to that is the button that talks about kind of the quality. So you can set these to draft mode. So you can set things up to be very low resolution if that's one way. That is one way to preserve. One second. It's one way to preserve the compute resources on your computer. So if you're okay with looking at low res in draft form, so that you can get assets where you want them, and then you can turn on the high quality when you're ready to actually tweak things. David.
How do you open up the bars with all the effects? That mini bar and that little mini bar in the folder area.
This one?
No, in the folder.
Oh, this one over here?
Lower left.
Oh, sorry. You should have talking about over here.
Lower left.
Lower left. Oh, come on, Randy.
Yeah, right.
This right here.
No, below and then look at the little title bar.
I'm just below the
David, you gotta help me, man. When you're saying lower left, I'm like,
FX. I was trying to say FX button.
yeah, we'll get to them. So we will get there.
Well, I mean, like they don't show up on my computer. Are they supposed to default?
You might. So yes, and I'll show you how to get there. So once you get past these, so we'll switch this back to a high resolution, and it will take a moment to, again, get there. You have down here. So if you're not seeing all of these, the rest of these, and instead you're seeing, normal and none and something along those lines. That's this button down here that says toggle switches and modes. So if you click that, you'll see that it switches to this mode. And let me see if I can pull this. Yeah. Okay. So you have the ability to switch between these two capabilities by just clicking this bottom. So, continuing the brute force tour of this, like I said, I don't want to spend a whole lot more time on this because I want to keep moving. You have a checkbox for effects. So if you have any effects applied to these layers, this will be open. So again, if we were to just quickly, Randy. Nope, it's not there. All right. So we'll drop something on here. Just it doesn't really matter. So as soon as you drop an effect on there, you'll see that this layer has an effect capability. So you can turn all effects on or off for that layer the moment that you have effects on there. If there are no effects on there, it'll be grayed out and not available to you. So as soon as you do that, the effect disappears. You have this has to do with retiming clips. We won't go into that today. This is motion blur. We're not going to go into that today. If these are adjustment layers, meaning that they basically effects apply to this layer apply to everything underneath. Adjustment layers are kind of special. How many of you guys played with adjustment layers in Photoshop? Very similar in how these work. You put an adjustment layer in and everything underneath it is affected by that. Yes? Okay, so that is how adjustment layers work in After Effects as well. And so there are some side effects that you want to be careful of. Then you also have, what?
Sorry, so that symbol indicates there's an adjustment.
If a layer is an adjustment layer, so if you came over here and you put new adjustment layer, what you'd notice is that that is lit up. Okay. That's all. Yeah, it's generally it's an invisible layer that you can apply effects to, and it cascades down. Or normally, effects that you apply to a single layer are just that layer. And then finally, you have this little box that if this checked, these layers become 3D layers, and we will talk about that in a 3D layer in a couple weeks, or 3D animation. Naomi.
Is there a history panel?
Don't think so, but there is a lot of undos. Oh, history's right here. So history's under the edit menu, where you can look at all of the terrible undos that I've done here. It should let you step back to the last time you opened the project. Okay. So yeah, we could go all the way back to whatever. Okay. Under here, we will talk extensively. We will talk a bit about this under animation, but this is where you can designate that one layer is subordinate to another, meaning that it will follow the lead of whatever layer you connect it to. That is called parenting. So you have a child layer, and you want to designate its parent, meaning what layer should this layer follow in terms of settings. And some of the settings that that apply to it include things like position, scale, rotation, etc. So some of those settings do apply. Now, if we switch down here to toggle switches and modes, you'll see the last three, or actually the last two that I'm going to talk about. And these have to do with blend mode. So these are, I'm going to close this up. So you've got 3 layers, and they all say mode and normal. If you just hover over it, it tells you, it says blending mode. And if you select it, you see the blend modes that you should be reasonably familiar with from Photoshop and from Premiere. And if you recall, maybe you don't, there's a few in Premiere and in Photoshop, you can go from normal all the way to luminosity, and they all behave the same way. After Effects has a few extra ones down here. We don't really go into too much detail about them. You're welcome to experiment to your heart's content. But they do have to do almost always with alpha or luma related blending. So because in Photoshop and in Premiere you do have that. There might actually, some of these might be in Premiere, I don't remember. But alpha is not something that you run into in Photoshop because you have transparency. But that's what the alpha channel represents, is transparency, is something transparent, so that if you were to composite it, whatever's underneath will show. So you have that, and then you also have this TRK matte, which is the track matte, which you'll notice that every layer except for the very topmost one has this available. And if you were to move this up to the topmost layer doesn't have it. That is because track mattes work from the bottom up. Okay, so they work with the layer directly above them. Okay, so if you wanted to, so if we turn this on, and why is that not showing? Meh. Let me full scale here so I can see what I'm doing here. 800% is probably a little big. Oh, still gone. All right, cool. Well, I'll add it again. So we'll go back in. I think I had done something. Yeah, okay. So if you have this in place, but you want to apply a track matte to it, you have some options. The default is obviously no track matte, but you'll see that it's going to say do an alpha matte on SDFFlogo.ai, do an alpha inverted matte, do a luma matte or a lumen inverted matte. This is based on whatever this layer is. It's going to apply these things to that to the top. So if we go there, you'll see that it shows the actually, this is going to be a little bit more interesting if we do this with a solid. So let me undo this, and we'll add a solid real quick, just a white solid. Okay, so we add a solid, and we'll just make it the comp size. Put it underneath so that we're seeing this. Okay, and then if we were to apply a alpha matte, won't work. Well, actually, it does work. Okay. So the alpha matte is based on the alpha of the SDFFlogo.ai layer. You're doing a matte that that shows the underlying layer. So this is the source material that is matte, that's showing this. This is the matte. This is what's basically stenciling out what's showing under here. Okay, and you have an inverted matte, you have a luma matte, and because the luma is, if you were to look at this layer, it's black. So black is obviously has a luma value of what? None or 0. So that's why if you do a luma matte all you're going to see is the yellow shadowing. So that could be intentional. That could be something that you want to use. But that's using the source. This is the source of the matte, and this is the content of what shows through the matte. Okay? That's an important distinction. What's on top is what's being used to create the matte, meaning what's showing, what's hidden. Where this gets really interesting, and what I don't have great source material for you tonight, is if you use video for these, it can be one of these. Remember how trippy it was when you did blend modes in Premiere, and you're like, "Oh, look at that, that's fun." If you do track mats, it's like the iTunes commercial, sort of interesting, where you can use some dude dancing on a green screen background with headphones, and you can mat that out into a color, or you can have some other video playing in the background that reveals that. So track mats are really interesting capabilities. Okay, parenting, like I said, we're not gonna talk about tonight. Okay, so what do we got? We got 15 minutes. I'll make it happen before we get going. So now I'm going to quickly show you guys a new comp. Go default again, so it's nice and cleared out. I'm going to grab what we're going to do now is we're going to play with shape layers. Okay, so these are vector layers that you can draw onto. So these act a bit like Illustrator capabilities, where you can choose different shapes. You have rectangles, ellipses, polygons, and stars, and so on. You can choose how they render right here. You can put them on screen. And as soon as you do that, you actually are creating, by drawing them on the screen, you actually create a shape layer. So shape layers are very interesting. They're kind of first order capabilities here. You can use shape layers to do a variety of stuff. Right now, for basic compositing reasons, we want to choose. Let me choose a different color this time. So we'll choose some green stars, and by clicking off of the shape layer, if none of these shape layers are selected, and you click and you create a new you click into the window, you actually create a new shape layer as well. So there's kind of the behavior of shape layers when you go and create one, or when there isn't one and you create a shape, it'll create one for you. If there's one selected already and you keep clicking in the canvas or in the viewer, you'll create a shape in that same shape layer. So each of these has 4 blue stars, okay, in this layer, 4. You have 3 green stars, and you have 3 red stars. Okay, so there's the notion that shape layers you can, and it doesn't have to all be one shape. You can also create a shape layer with a. We'll click off here so that we'll click outside. Create a rectangle. So now we've got a new shape layer. We'll go with a new color. Fuchsia's looking good. A new shape. And okay, now you've got a polygon and a rectangle all in the same shape layer. But notice that they are the same color. So if you click fill, you're changing the fill for that whole layer. So, oh no, this time I changed it just for the polystar. Well, there you go. Oh, it's because I changed it for the rectangle and then I created the polystar from that. It was still selected. So you don't have to, yeah, shape layers. They're very straightforward. The idea behind them is that each of these becomes a polygon, what they call a path on your project. So you'll see that every one of these shapes, if you decide to kind of delve into these, you'll see that there's a path object for each one of these. So if you scroll down, you'll see polystar, and there's a path for those, and so on. So you can see that there are these paths. Now that's important. Part of this is you can use this to your benefit. When you click on nothing in After Effects, you create a shape layer. That goes as well for the pen tool. If you want to create a new shape, you can create, a shape of any arbitrary variety. So it can be, and these are editable shapes that you can morph over time, shapes that you can choose what to do with. Okay, and
all of the shapes you created are adjustable in that way.
Well, in different ways. You can, if you are so moved, you can sometimes you can create paths from these shape paths, these pre-drawn ones, and then from there. So I'm right-clicking or control-clicking on this, and it says convert to Bezier path. If you do that, then this becomes an editable path that you can now.
So when you first
modify.
make the shapes like the stars and such, are they raster and are they just?
No, these are all vector. So they're
vector.
all vector layers. In fact, if you look here, you'll see that they all have that lit. They all have that particular thing lit, and you can't turn it off. Okay, so that's part of it. It's like it's permanently on. Yeah.
How do you, is After Effects the same with their shape making tools, or like a button you can press to change how many?
I don't remember, but I think so. Yeah. So is it under?
The polystar points.
Oh yeah. So where is the? Burp, 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 burp.
Inside the layers.
Oh, it's inside the layers here.
Yeah.
Transfer. No, that's not it.
At least with the stars, you can change the number of sides it has.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. Yeah. So you have to drill down into it. You do have the ability to increase the number of points on the star, so you can make them any number you wish. You can actually, you should be able to change. Yeah, you can change how the inner radius and outer radius work on these. You have roundness, so you can make them fat or skinny. Same for the outer, so you can kind of soften the points. So you have a variety. So all of these are available to you as knobs to turn. What you will notice, where we are starting to show, what you're starting to see as you move into this, is that After Effects is pretty deep well, right? It's pretty. It's immediately. It goes from safety wheels off to you're on a racetrack. I mean, it's like you really don't have. There's no safeties. You can definitely. Is it survival or safety not guaranteed? Or I can't remember the title of the movie, but so use it. Well, yeah, some of that is that's why I use phrases like your mileage may vary, the rabbit hole has no bottom, etc. Is that you will find that every aspect of After Effects has really, really deep capabilities. And then once you realize that it has these deep capabilities, then you learn expressions, and then you realize that that capability just increased in complexity by an order of magnitude. So you can go really, really out there with this. This is absolutely where you can, world is your oyster, everybody. Enjoy.
And this is a finishing tool then for film, or what?
It is a visual effects tool. It is also a motion graphics tool, and it is also a finishing tool. You can use this to finish. You can do color work with this, but if and what I had was one student in here from I think 2 years ago wanted to have some tech. He had a live shot of a park somewhere in Sonoma County, and he was panning to a bus stop. And then he came to rest on the bus stop, and he wanted to have, as he was panning, he wanted to have text appear on the lawn that looked like it was in the scene, had shadows, depth. It was placed somewhere as such that when the camera moved, the text looked like it was in the scene, and it was like it had thickness, So all of that was something that we were able to do with this tool. And it can be what I would use this for your semester projects is your opening sequence. You will want to use this for that. Yeah.
This also the tool that will let you do flames. I have my hand.
Yes.
This in a video, then you put a flame.
You could get a video element of a flame, or you could generate one in After Effects from scratch. You can. It won't look as good as a real, camera shot flame element, but you could do that and have it just in your hand. Or I was talking about visual effects. God, this is where things are going to get weird. I do a vlog. Yeah. Okay. So everybody does it now, right? A vlog. No. So it's but I was talking about a certain rap hip hop artist that had one student was saying, "Oh, look at these awesome things." Oh, it was you, David, wasn't it? That's right. Okay. Where you were showing me a music video and it had this guy and it had these people with flames coming off their heads, but they were wrapped in rope. So there you go. So I was thinking, oh God, who told me this? But yes, it's a really interesting, it's a basic compositing move, but it sells. I mean, you look at it, you're like, wow, those guys look like their heads are actually on fire, without all the blistering. So, without all the pain, suffering, screaming, and death. Yeah. And eventual consumption by flames. So the
add-ons too, right? I downloaded a Lego add-on to put like some laser beams for Star Wars, so that you could have.
You could do lightsabers. Yeah, I was like, God, I want to say laser swords, and I know that's not it. God, hey man, if Mark Hamill says it in the movie, it's canon. All right.
But those are like, are those considered like user interface add-ons?
Yeah, those would be basically those are program add-ons. And here's the fun thing is in a lot of cases those add-ons are using the expression capabilities of After Effects and just to basically do some busy work for you. So you don't have to do them by hand yourself. You can rotoscope, composite, and follow, do a track of a lightsaber, on screen yourself. You can do that, but it's tedious.
So what I can tell, it's just like a flow. They made a line that can flow that you can modify, and then you just have to add the sound yourself.
Yeah, then it's sound design. That's all that's left, right? Just sound design. But yes, all of that is, and in many cases, that is, those are either, third-party, programs that will generate some of those pixels for you and then composite them, provide them to After Effects to display on the layer, or they're using built-in capabilities of After Effects and just kind of doing some sleight of hand under the behind the scenes to like busy work. So in some cases, it's like if you're tracking a bunch of things, there's a bunch. We'll get to plugins, third-party plugins down the road, where you can go to find some more of these. There's a couple of sites that I recommend. Other than Red Giant and Video Copilot, there's another place. Yeah, there's more. There's more than just those two. All right, Lariva.
What's the chief competitor to After Effects? What other programs do this? And
Oh, okay. So you know, I did have I did talk about that too later on. So, you know, AutoCAD makes one. I think it's called Smoke. There's yeah, Autodesk. Sorry. And there's another one called Nuke that I don't remember who makes that one. I think it's the Foundry. So there's some other competing products out there. There are ones that are much more high powered than After Effects, and in fact use different paradigms. So one of the things you're going to figure out about After Effects, if you delve this bottomless pit, is that there are limitations on how it does things that are not always the most awesome. It doesn't mean that you can't accomplish something, because you can almost invariably work around those limitations. But there are other compositing tools that use different paradigms called node-based compositing instead of layer-based compositing. This is layer-based compositing right here. Everything about After Effects has to do with what layer is where. What are the position of that element? In two-dimensional compositing, which is where we are right now, what you'll notice is that everything you see, so everything on this layer is like, you have what's on the bottom here is on the bottom here. What's on the top here is on the top. And if you move something from the top down, it's obscured by the new thing that's on top, okay? So there's very real rules that apply in 2D compositing in After Effects. Layers that are down below are underneath all the time in 2D compositing. Okay? And the reason why I say 2D compositing is because there's that asterisk that you're sensing in your mind that we will get to when we talk about 3D animation. So two-dimensional compositing, shape layers. I think I've you know, so this is just scratching the surface of compositing for you guys, okay? So let's talk about, as I continue to zoom out, let's talk about what I want you guys to do, because it's 8:45 and I want to kind of transition this back to what we're doing. So compositing basics. Yeah, so I was you know, these comparable to video tracks in Premiere and layers in Photoshop, right? With the eyeballs, these have the eyeballs. You have effects that you apply to them, and so on. Similarities to Photoshop. Yep. Oh yeah, we were going to talk about importing PSD. So yes, before we finish today, we'll do that. You can create compositions using Photoshop PSD files. So let's show you that before we wrap this and I cut you loose to do something on your own. So if you go over here and you in the project you want to import something, you can either double click here in an empty spot of the project, or you can go to File, Import, File. Gets you the same place, and you can click on this NBU login fullscreen.psd. Okay. So since it is a Photoshop file, this import as option lights up. If you do it, if you do it on something that's not a media that has the ability, that has options for importing, it will stay grayed out. So you can import Illustrator files as well. So you can do that for both Illustrator or Photoshop files. You have this option to import as, and you can import it as a composition or a composition with retaining the layer sizes. Now, there's an important distinction here, but it's not too big of a deal. The composition, if you just import it as a composition, every single layer that you import will have the same size. It will be sized the same for every layer. So it will be the size of the composition, which is the size of the image that you're importing. Okay, so if your image, so this image says that it's 1920 by 1080. So guess what? You're going to be importing a 1920 by 1080 composition if you do this. Retain layer sizes basically says that for each individual layer, size the layer exactly for the minimum size that the layer needs to be for what's in that layer. So considering that this logo on this is smaller than 1920 by 1080, it would be smaller. However, this awesome rainbow unicorn robot, is really actually also a 1080p image. So, but for fun, we'll do retain layer sizes just so that you can see the difference here. You can create a composition, and if you just click OK, if you create a composition, it will import it as a, well, actually, I think it imports it as a composition either way. Yeah, so it's going to importing as a composition, retain layer styles, editable layer styles, or merge layer styles into footage. So if you have layer styles in Photoshop, it will either import them as different effects that you can work on, or it will merge them. But we just leave them as editable layer styles for this. And here we are. It has created two things. There's a composition that it created, and there's also a folder that it created. And in that folder contains 4 references, one for each layer that's in that Photoshop file. So if you double click it, you can see, it is a composition that shows me all the things that I've done. And if you open this file up in Photoshop, you can see the pre-work that I did. This unicorn is actually masked out from the background. So, and you can tell, I'm not sure that it will show you that here. So let's see. So yeah, you can see that there's a logo, there's a glow, kind of generic glow element. But as you mouse over them, you'll see that they show, like here, you can see the bounding box is just around the logo itself. It's not taking up the whole screen. When we get to the unicorn, yeah, so the unicorn is actually bounded based on just the pixels that are visible through the mask that was created. Okay, so robot unicorns, telling you, everybody should have one. Now, since they're in a composition, now you can do things, right? You can independently vary these things. So let's talk a little bit about some keyboard shortcuts before I lay you into this. Is for every time you're looking in a layer, if you have a layer selected and you hit, let's say P, you'll bring up what's called the position attribute or the position value, okay? If you hit it again, it collapses. So it's like a toggle on and off, okay? So you can do position and P for position. You can do S for scale. What do you think is the letter for opacity? It's not O. It's T. Of course. Of course it is. This is what I mean by you got to do things After Effects' way, because After Effects cares nothing for what you want. And when you go in here, you can independently modify the opacity of, well, actually this will, since they're all selected, it's modifying them all the same. If, for instance, you wanted to go to position, you could move all the positions, or you could move one thing's position, or just you want to get the unicorn off to the side so that you can see some of that sweet floating chained whatever city in the sky. So you get the idea that all of these can be varied independently of one another. If you don't want to look at if you don't want to look at them one at a time, you can also just twirl down, and it will open up what's called the transform group. Transform applies to any layer that you have in After Effects. So if you twirl this one down, you'll see that you have these core attributes. You have position. You have this thing called anchor point, which we will talk about in 3D more. You have scale. Anchor point really is what's the point around which this object will rotate. is really what it boils down to. So you have position, you have scale, so you can scale things. You can scale them independently of one another. You can also choose to scale one dimension independently of the other as well. You do have rotation. You also have the ability, if you notice that once this hits one rotation, this number here increments. So when it starts with 0 and 0 degrees. So it's 0 revolutions and 0 degrees. So if you increase this past 360, it goes up to 1, up to 2, and so on. So you can see how many times it's rotated from its original form. And then opacity, of course, like I said, you can make it transparent. Okay. These are the basic attributes of every layer that you're going to run into. Okay. Shape layers we've gone through. Shape layers versus non-shape layers. So since we're on this, since we're looking at this composition, we have multiple layers on here. What do you think will happen if we draw a shape on here? You'd think that. And you'd be right. Now, what would happen if you if you click on a layer and it's not selected, what do you see happening? It's creating a mask, okay? So that shape is actually creating a mask. If it's so a shape layer is if nothing's selected and you'll create a shape layer. But if any of these are selected and you use any of these shapes, you will create a mask, okay? And these masks add up. So you can add multiple masks to a layer. So that can cause all kinds of things, but that has to do with these abilities. We'll talk more about masks, but generally speaking, these should be relatively familiar. Again, you ran into some of this stuff that you got in Photoshop. So if I delete these, okay, we've got the pen tool works the same way. So if you want to create a mask around a certain region, it's going to mask out that one region entirely, but it's going to be as a mask path as opposed to a shape. Okay, I think so that's really the short answer for how the pen tool and the shape tools behave. On a shape layer, it adds a shape. On a non-shape layer, if a non-shape layer is selected, it's going to create a mask. That's an important distinction, and it will frustrate you. How do you create a mask on a shape layer? So we'll go to comp 1. How would you create a mask on a shape layer? Any ideas? What's that? There is an option up at the top. So you can actually come in here, select a layer, and then there's these little buttons. One says tool creates shape, tool creates mask. If you click the mask, then your tool will mask that shape layer. So that is how you add masks to shape layers. Okay, so now instead of adding another shape to that under the contents group, it adds a mask under the masks group. So pre-comps, okay, we're out of time on pre-comps, so I'm going to punt till next week. Basically, pre-composition acts a lot like groups. You can, and a bit like nested sequences, a kind of a combination of the two. If you wanted to treat multiple things like they were the same thing, you can come over here and pre-compose. So under the layer menu, pre-compose, and if there's really no, sometimes you'll have the ability to leave attributes in comp 1 if there are any effects or attributes that can be left behind. You sometimes have the option. In this case, since they're shape layers, we're moving them all to a new comp. And now you've basically got this thing called a pre-comp that has those two comps in it. So now you see them show up together. The downside is that now they behave like one layer in this composition. Okay, so you can and it has its own transform group. So now those two layers move as one in terms of how they behave. They behave like a composition. They don't behave like shape layers now. So that's an important distinction. If you need to get to that pre-comp, you can always double click it. And now you're looking at just that, and you'll see it under here. It says composition pre-comp. And you'll see that there's a little flow here that shows you the distance between one and the next. So you can see that comp one has this pre-comp one inside of it. So you can look at that. If you click on this, you'll see that there's what they call a mini flow chart. There is the ability, we'll talk about the flow chart later on as we get to a more complicated compositions. Okay, so and you can always go back to the previous comp by looking here, back in the flow, and now you're looking at the master again. Okay, so yes, that's definitely it. So for the remaining time, I know it's 9 o'clock, but you have the After Effects project I provided to create. I'd like you guys to create a live text template. Now, how does that look? That can be opened in Premiere. So this would be using what's called the essential graphics capabilities in After Effects. So essential graphics is actually under the workspaces here. You can switch to that workspace and it brings up this pane. If you don't want to do that, you can also just bring up the pane through the Windows menu. So you can go to essential graphics and it will pop in here. Now, if you have text on here, actually this is more than just this, but what I want you to do is create a text layer inside of here. What's up? Okay. And then using that, you can actually find the, if you drag it up here, nothing happens. So you got to select the comp first. So say we want to comp 1. Okay. So now we want to look at, I wonder if we can drag it up now. Nope, we still can't drag it up now. So what is it that we want to change on this? Some of these are that you're creating kind of a template that you can tweak the knobs outside of After Effects. So if you wanted to change the text of a layer, you can come to a text layer, twirl down this disclosure, and you'll see that one above the transform group, there's a text group, and inside of that is source text. This is what you basically drag up here, and then now all of a sudden you can call this greeting, and it says what's up. Okay, so now once this is you've created this, you can export this, and it will, pardon me, you'll export this as a either under, you can do it under Essential Graphics as a preset, but I want you to do it as a template. And yeah, it's going to create this kind of funky looking thing. And what you can do at this point is open this up in Premiere and import it here. This might be beyond what we're doing tonight. We'll see if it's not making sense to involve, well, Essential Graphics, browse. Nope. Nope. All right. Yeah. We'll punt on this. We'll skip this one because it's just getting too crazy for me. For now, let's keep it straightforward and use the PSD file that you've imported and play with the LumaTrack map. So I'd like you to actually integrate this in After Effects. I want you to integrate this comp, not this comp 1 comp, but the nope, not full screen either. Come on, Randy. Where are you going, Randy? There we go. Okay. So, and we'll close Essential Graphics because that's just making things crazy. So this composition you can take layers from it and integrate it with this composition here, or just add the this logo into it. So the idea is that or you can play with the track mat based on what's already in the composition itself by just playing with applying track or luma mats alpha or luma mats to the various layers that are above it. Yeah. All right. No track mat there. That's pretty much going to be it for tonight. And again, if I burned a lot of time on this, so I apologize if you don't have time to play with it. Or if you followed along and you feel like you've got a lot of this, I know that there's a lot of stuff. We covered a ton of stuff this period. And I understand that it hurts, but honestly, the distance that you had to go was, learning how to do comps and being able to start to deal with blending modes, which you already played with in in Premiere, and hopefully in some form or fashion in Photoshop. You have some of that you can leverage to move you forward on this. All right, so that's the rest of the class for tonight. I'm going to turn on the lights and answer questions. Pat you on the back, tell you you're doing fine. I know.
That computer doesn't work either.
Really?
Nothing. It's exactly the same thing, so I'm not moving much tonight.
No, that's fine. I kind of got you sitting there. I was like, wow. Well, actually, I think that let me make sure that the sound worked on this to this point. Yeah, okay, it does, and it worked, and so this week's lecture will be listenable. I know. Yeah, I'm happy too. Trust me.
2018.
Yeah, it's like woo, 2018. So, but yeah, so if you need to watch this again, or you need to scan through it to see some of the techniques, see Elliot's got a lot of this. Look at that. Like that. It's not hard but it's like you got to be real. And again, when you're working with still images or vector content that's not motion, it's real simple. It's when you get into like if video is the source that you're using as a track map. Really kind of fun.
So I kind of like this things.
What?
I kind of like about that.
It is a one-way.
Photoshop.
Yeah, it is one way to group them.
Right.
When you group things in Photoshop, you create a little folder with thank you.
I missed this part.
Yeah, it got too complicated, so I backed out of it. So we'll talk about templating in that form.
This assignment.
Yeah, you can still do that with what you've got here.
Okay.
It's available to you. What? Yeah. Which file? Oh, the actual. Yeah, you can turn it next week. I mean. Wait. You want to run downstairs?
What was the uniform path?
What's that?
What was the uniform PST path? Or was that a comp?
NBU.
It was the
I
NBU.
only got partial.
Oh, really? Huh. So it was folder on your desktop. What's up?
Yeah, for me, it was just like to track, like, how, like, like, yeah, I know, I think. After sex.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is experimentation. Sets you free. Yeah, I know.
Because it's like once you, it's like in a class like this, once you like get lost, it's over. Don't even try
Don't
to
fall
get back
behind.
on it. It's like it's fruitless.
Well, I don't want you to
just have
feel
put
like
extra
it's
work. Yeah.
yeah.
Which is
Right.
probably why we
Have I had some people?
well, I don't know, it seemed more full.
Seems like I had 2 people not show up.
Oh.
The class actually is pretty stable. So I'm feeling like we're now getting to the part where things get a little more challenging. So I expect the questions next week. So just making sure really using experiment. Part of it is I can't tell you. Oh yeah. Well yeah, but I can't try every. I can't turn every knob for you.
I have two
Just get a computer fix and I
How
can
many
turn it myself.
How to make a car get
That
off.
is that one essential ingredient.
So
That's my client. They're like, I'll pay you how much money they can ask
to make a car.
Oh,
That's actually not that hard to do. But we'll get to that in rotoscoping.
Get those started.
well, you could kind of fake it by taking video and then positioning it up. So you know how you can use the position tool to move the part up, mask the bottom off, and
Well-
then reinsert the background and layer it.
Right. And part of it is that what you would deal with is,
So you need a still shot of the background, and then you take the still shot of the car, and then position the car as it moves up, so you do car, and you have to have a mask that tracks it.
you know, as soon as, so here's the other axiom of this lifestyle, is that filmmaking is troubleshooting. You're always troubleshooting, always working out how to solve a problem. So as soon as you guys start talking about, oh, I need to film a car flying off the ground, you hit on a lot of the points that were correct. It's like you get a clean plate. You basically want
The
some
background-
footage without the car,
Yeah, the background.
where the car is going to be. Now, if you really want to make it sell the shot well, you would then place the car in the same scene, and then you would do something to try and mask the car out. Whether that is you have a bunch of green cardboard or blue cardboard or some other
green cloth.
well, yes,
Yeah.
and you can do that. You can actually even do it with a relatively small flex fill green screen, and just do multiple exposures and then composite those together into one. I'm telling you, this is. I mean, you want to do it cheap or you want to do it good. So
Yeah.
part of this is you would do
So
multiple
you kind of
exposures,
stitch them together.
stitch them together, and then you key it out, and that will create a map, just like what we're talking about with